Hello and welcome to the Barcast, coming to you on a beautiful Wednesday morning here in New York. Fall weather is in full swing, and we're completing the 8 today with this self-preservation 8, whose keyword is satisfaction. So, quick recap, we had the social 8, whose keyword was complicity. The sexual 8, whose keyword is possessiveness, and now satisfaction. There are differences between the subtypes of the 8, but they certainly share a lot of qualities, I think. So let's see if we can get into the differences between possessiveness and satisfaction here. So this is Naranjo. The most armored of all 8s is the self-preservation subtype. The word that defines them is satisfaction. I have to have it. This is mine. I need to have it. It's more of an intolerance for the frustration of not having what they want than the possession itself. In this sense, they're somewhat like the sexual 1 subtype, who also becomes obsessive in their desires, but a 1 is really different from an 8. The former is hypersocial, while the latter is completely antisocial. 1 is overly concerned with norms, and the other cares far too little. Yeah, again, we've got the 8 and the 1 as those two edges of the doing triad, and the 8 being asocial, the 1 being hypersocial, the 8 being amoral, the 1 being hypermoral. So continuing, the self-preservation 8 subtype pursues the satisfaction of their needs. They don't usually speak much. They're like the lion. A lion only moves when it's hungry. It seeks to satisfy its unmet hunger and then sleeps for the rest of the day, very majestically. They embody a no-nonsense attitude, no words, no word games in a self-preserving 8. We could say that their need is that of an exaggerated self-interest. These are people who know how to do business and know how to bargain to place themselves above everyone else. There's an expression, a used car dealer. This is the art or talent of the self-preserving 8. But it's also their need. They're a survivor, a term often used to describe 8s in general, but more indicative of the self-preserving 8. They know how to survive in the most difficult situations. They know how to get things, how to get their way. So again, now that we're in the doing triad, it's so interesting that the 8 here being compared to a lion, there's an animalistic quality that I think is appropriate here. 8s really are quite embodied in a way. And so again, we're moving away, I think, from interiority of the thinking triad and more into this embodied, externalized quality. Yeah, we're talking about a survivor here who's the version of self-preservation here, conservative, is like an animal, who doesn't talk a lot, doesn't waste words. It's this exaggerated self-interest. I love the image of sort of a lion who only moves when he's hungry, right? So there's this majestic laziness here for the 8. And that laziness starts to push into 9. I think there's a way that the self-preservation 8 feels the most 9-ish to me. And we'll get to that more. But there's also a wheeling and dealing quality here, reminiscent of the 7, this used car dealer. So, and complicity again, there, brought up some 7 qualities there too. They survive not merely through physical needs, but also through getting what they want. But there's an economy here throughout the depiction of the 8. So this is the transformation of the self-preserving 8 by Juanjo Albert. This is actually a transcription of a conversation. So Claudio says, I'm not sure if everyone here knows Juanjo Albert, a figure of national psychiatric mythology. We haven't seen him around here in a long time. Self-preserving 8s are rare. So I'm delighted to have one who is not only a self-preserving 8, but also an experienced psychiatrist who has not only seen himself through a long process, but also seen many patients throughout his life. Surely he's come to understand people like himself. This is Juanjo. Juanjo is Juan Jose, who I looked him up. He died in 2017. Juanjo says, Well, I had prepared a serious lecture with etiology, etc., but I'll stick to Claudio's suggestion to talk about what the path of self-awareness is like for a self-preserving 8. So I'll read my text to save time. And this is really great. I'm going to read it in its entirety. First of all, what self-preserving 8s need to understand is that by relying on our belief that goodness and good intentions don't exist, we discredit and disqualify any feeling, person, idea, or institution that opposes our desires in our own eyes and those of others. We also disqualify merely to have something to oppose. When an 8 approaches therapy, they already sense this. Even if they don't entirely believe in the therapeutic process, it's from this intuition that they approach it. So, really dense. 8s need to understand, they need to recognize that they don't believe in goodness. So from that disbelief comes a discrediting of any kind of appeal to goodness, whether that's through a person, an idea, an institution, etc. So that's that amorality. It feels Nietzschean, and I was thinking about the lion with Nietzsche. Like there's a renunciation of good and evil, going beyond good and evil here, but it's actually a problem for the 8. They're not able to believe in goodness in themselves, seemingly, or in others. And so opposition emerges not just from that, but also just sort of almost like boredom, like just opposing for opposing's sake. And that goes to the sort of idiosyncratic belief systems of 8s that came up earlier, the possessiveness keyword. 8s sort of have their own bespoke way of doing things. It might be like the way of the jungle, or it might be my way or the highway. But there's almost a creativity to ideology for the 8s. But if there is an appeal, it is, I think, sort of the law of the jungle. May the best man win. Believing in sort of conflict as a way to sort out what's right. Sort of a survivorship, a sort of a Darwinian perspective. So, but yet there's an emptiness here. From here, we must begin to accept the anguish caused by the emptiness of having no real reason to oppose things. This emptiness is a moral emptiness. We also need to accept that this compulsive movement is purely a response to intolerance, frustration, and anguish, and that ultimately it is nothing but a desire for revenge for reasons we're not even aware of. It's healthy, therefore, to open ourselves to understanding that something must be covering up this compulsion to attack, since there's no objective reason to attack. So an 8 early in their journey, according to Albert, is going to recognize their sort of punitive, vengeful nature, even if they're not accessing why. They can recognize that there's something vengeful about the way that they engage with the world, but they're not connected with, at least at this stage, the wrong that was done to them in their early childhood. They're not connected with that vulnerability. So on whose behalf are they seeking revenge is not necessarily clear to them. But they can see, like, gosh, there's this way that I'm at war. I'm in opposition. I'm always trying to get revenge. And again, we've talked at length about the connections to the 4, in particular the sexual 4. A lot of similar behaviors here, despite really different interiorities. And so if you're looking, whether you're 4 or 8, as I've been challenged to do in various moments, the 8 is really embodied. The 8 really feels vengeance and identifies as a strong physical being. They have a lot of energy. The 4 may manifest a part that does that, but the 4 is going to be a more interior being, not feeling so strong, feeling quite a disconnect from their world around them, from people around them, and is going to be more in touch with their wounded side. The 4 feels their wounds quite deeply. The 8, what wounds? Fuck you. Fuck you, those wounds, right? So the 8 has that. The 8 is that lion. The 4 can wear a lion's mask. Self-preserving 8s also need to open themselves to the understanding that in reality, there is something beyond the purely material and physical, and that we are more than just a body. We need to understand that life goes beyond what can be perceived sensorially, that love exists, and that for us, it is a complete unknown experience. From this ignorance of love, we can acknowledge that it is precisely love, being unknown, that frightens us. It helps to recognize the impotence to love and the disqualification with which we view the world of feelings, precisely to hide this impotence toward love. Maybe a little bit of translation tweaking there, but yeah, so again, the 8's lack of interiority, the 8 needs to recognize that love exists, and that's painful and scary because the 8 doesn't know what love is. We talked about in the possessiveness chapter, the I-it relationship that a sexual 8 is going to have in relationship, right? Their woman is their possession. I'm speaking of 8s as men. Women often, women can be 8s, but women who are 8s are masculine in sort of the broad scope. And when we get to the 2, we'll talk a lot about the connection between 2 and 8, because I think a lot of women in, at least in Western society, society wants women to be 2s. And so a lot of women who are 2s or present as 2s sort of have this 8 shadow side of them. This is sort of the aggressive masculine side. And again, you can hear the 8 is a protector. The 8 is almost like a mama grizzly bear. There is this very maternal, protective quality to the 8, nurturing. The 8 loves an underdog because that's where the 8 gets their sense of strength from. So the connection between 2 and 8 is very strong. I think that's of all the lines, the stretch and release lines in the Enneagram, the one I would say that's most like brightest and important to understand is the line between 2 and 8 from my experience. So, but in general, I'm going to be kind of maybe using he or masculine terms to evoke this lion energy. But you could think about a mama grizzly bear for sure. So, but in any case, love as in I, thou is not available, whether you think of it as a possessive King Midas or a mama grizzly bear. It's still a particular kind of love that is a protective, possessive love. And the 8 doesn't know this deeper love. They have to recognize that. Self-preserving 8s also need to recognize that their generous protection of the group, even allowing others to rely on them, is merely a way to secure their status and hide their insecurity. We must realize that this generous offer imposes the condition that things are always done our way and demands that others give up part of their lives and ways of doing things. All this implies a form of obedience that we falsely call loyalty. Self-preserving 8s give in drips and drops under strict control as a way to create dependence. And in turn, we also end up enslaved by this dependence. So, more of that feeling of the kind of job that the 8's protective love is doing for them. And again, like this is a psychiatrist. These are uncompromising words across the whole book. These are challenging looks at some of our best qualities as protective mechanisms. And so it's not to say that the 8's protective love doesn't serve a really beautiful purpose in many contexts. But if you're doing this kind of work, you say, oh, I'm beginning to see the way that my generosity and my protective generosity is itself a way to further scaffold and fortify my ego sense of control, power, autonomy. I love my way on my terms, and the ones I love are my possessions. Or in this case, I'm satisfied, right? And we'll get into satisfaction more. Under the guise of securing others' loyalty, what we seek is to feel safe. Then we end up blaming those we protect for being dependent on us, for not doing things well and independently on their own terms, since we want everything our way. A very important step in evolving consists of letting go of the need for possession, both of material things and the emotions of others. It's about coming to the conviction that the world and people don't belong to us and aren't at our disposal. Recognizing others' right to their own lives, letting go of the desire to possess people and goods, and trusting in the generosity of others and in life itself are equally steps toward healing. This renunciation of possessiveness may be one of the hardest and most time-consuming steps toward establishing a healthy core in the personality, as possession is one of the ways we feel secure. We feel secure in our lives. And relinquishing it forces us to confront the anguish of insecurity. It feels akin to being stripped of any possible protection. So let's spend a little time with this because possession keeps coming up, but we are with the self-preserving 8, whose keyword is not possessiveness, but is satisfaction. So what is the difference between the sexual 8 and the self-preservation 8? And every time we're using these keywords, we're looking for what Naranjo calls the ontic vacuum, the fundamental emptiness, and then this sort of looping that happens like a weather pattern, the spiraling that happens to create energy that obscures the ontic vacuum, obscures the emptiness. So let's go back to the sexual 8. I must possess, right? I can't be in real I-thou relationship with others. I must possess people and things. Can't let things be free. Must have things be mine. So there's a master-slave relationship. There's kind of a real sadism and possessiveness there. I must have all that. And yet the more things become mine, the more they're not really mine. So in a relationship, if my woman has to be my possession and my possessiveness, what's going to happen? One is she might flee and eject from the relationship, leaving me really rewounding me in that original way of feeling like I don't have anything. I'm powerless. This powerlessness. So I might get my powerlessness rewounded through the person exiting the relationship. Alternately, the power may itself feel insufficient, right? So this person is mine, but the more she becomes mine, the more I lose interest in her. And maybe I'm watching her waste away. And so I'm discovering this way that when I possess things, they sort of degrade and they lose their luster over time. So in my passion, I take things, but then they wither under my possession. And then I need to possess more, and I feel that powerlessness again. So that's the loop for the sexual 8. For the self-preservation 8, it's more armor and safety protected. I must I want a family, I want a wife, I want kids, I want a good job. I want to feel satisfied in my whole life. I want everything to sort of be in place. So it's maybe less of a greedy possession, but more of an intolerance, as Albert says at the beginning, an intolerance of not being satisfied, an intolerance of not having things satisfied. Um, but in order to meet my needs for safety, I maybe need constant reaffirmation of loyalty. I might have very high demands for security, high demands for safety. So there's a demanding quality there. And I think, again, that never fully satisfies my need for satisfaction. I'll never fully feel satisfied. And so I might continue to demand from others um, in ways that then they'll eventually let me down. So something like that, I would say, is the difference between satisfaction and possessiveness. Possessiveness is maybe spiraling toward a sense of power, like a phallus, like an autonomy and I'm the big man. Satisfaction is like I'm the fed lion. So slightly different. Albert continues, it helps to take responsibility for our actions and especially for our own failures, excesses, and exploitation of both ourselves and others without blaming anyone for their weakness. This inevitably involves recognizing the pain we've caused ourselves and others. It's necessary to acknowledge the ways we've used people and their lives, both emotionally and physical, for our own benefit. Even those we claimed or believed to love, whether out of malice or ignorance. It's important to see the insensitivity to pain, the disregard, the lack of consideration, the indifference to others' lives, except as mere objects to be thrown aside. This is the critical bridge for the self-preserving Enneatype 8. And crossing it entails such a laceration of emotional and physical pain that one never wishes to cause this harm again, neither to others nor oneself. I believe this is the point of no return. Once we become aware of the consequences of the pain we inflict on ourselves and others, there's no desire to revisit this. In my experience, this has been the crucial point. The experience of the pain caused leaves no option but to continue forward, trying not to fall back into it, and to restore as much as possible the harm done. After this realization, we become intensely sensitive to the emotional pain we can unnecessarily cause. By seeing the pain, we strive to be impeccable in our actions and care for others. On this path, we come to understand and realize that the other's pain is also ours, not theoretically, but within our own flesh, and we can come to choose to be harmed rather than harm others. Thus, consideration for others, recognizing them as free and sensitive individuals, not as objects of exploitation, is the achievement from which this Enneatype begins to grow and mature. So really beautiful lines here by Albert, and it's a pretty basic awakening that the 8 has to go through, which is like, oh, other people are subjects and have interiors, and this pain that I'm maybe only dimly aware of carrying of my own childhood, right? The 8 had some moment where they had to, they couldn't be vulnerable. They couldn't, there was a rapid maturation that had to happen for the young 8 under an authoritarian childhood. They became little, survivors. The 8 confronts how much they hurt other people by disregarding them. The eight in some way made a vow never to be authoritarian like their father, let's say, was, and yet becomes brutally authoritarian in their relationships with others. Needs others, uses others to get their satisfaction, to get their sense of security, to feel powerful through possession. And when the 8 reckons with what I imagine for Albert is they're hurting others the way that they themselves were hurt as young children. The goodness in them, the innocence, the protective quality itself speaks up and says, I can't do this. I'll take the pain. I don't need to be satisfied. If being satisfied means hurting people in this way, then I refuse to do it. And that's where the strength of the 8 emerges. But maintaining this awareness, Albert continues, is not easy due to both the tendency toward unconscious action based on the pure habit of not considering anything beyond ourselves and the difficulty of controlling our own impulse. Control over impulsivity, whether for actions that, from a moral point of view, we might consider bad or those we'd consider good, is a tool without which it's difficult to move forward. Controlling the impulse involves not only stopping the action, but most importantly, being conscious in the present of the consequences our actions may have on others. This means keeping others present in our awareness to avoid acting without regard for the consequences. It's difficult, but this awareness helps in striving for impeccability in action. It's worth trying. And I know I've gone on at length about the 4 and the 8 because I myself recognize parts of me in the 8, but I get the sense that there's a universality here, that just disregarding others is, I think, a act of ignorance that we all participate in all the time. And a lot of time it's unconscious. It's true ignorance. It's true disregard. You're just not thinking. All you can think about is your own needs, your own satisfaction. And you act and do and say and feel and think things that are incredibly destructive for the other. And so just simply controlling the impulsive wish and slowing down and bringing into the conscious mind how your actions are going to impact others is a huge, huge deal. So I think we all have lessons to learn for this, for the 8, but as Richard would say, the 8 is the one who's turned this into an art form. The 8 is chronically inconsiderate. Stopping the impulse and remaining still offers the opportunity to see what lies behind the compulsion to act. Additionally, it provides the chance to discern what we really need and want, and it opens the possibility of realizing that the compulsion to act is merely a response to the intolerance of frustration and anguish so typical of the self-preserving 8, engaged in a perpetual avoidance behavior, a cowardice. So here we have the cowardly lion. And so this is an important step. What seems to be mere impulsivity, I want it, so I get it. If the 8 does the work and slows down, they can detect an intolerance of frustration. Sitting with the frustration and pain of not getting what they wanted, that's what the 8 can't bear to do, because it takes them, I think, to a very vulnerable young place. Stopping the impulse also means giving the others opportunity to see us stripped of the power we often wield. It's the chance to present ourselves as limited and ordinary individuals, something we avoid as it might stifle our source of security. The neurotic thinking assures us that as long as you're loyal to me, I'll meet your needs. This is an important point, as it's one of the most unconscious movements in the self-preserving subtype, a pillar of their neurosis, since the self-preserving 8 assumes themselves omnipotent, capable of satisfying their own and others' needs. And there's a lot of 2 there as well. The 2 also denies that they have needs. And the 2 also wants a loyalty of sorts, but their loyalty comes in a really more indirect way than the 8, who has that masculine loyalty. You're my subject. I'm the king, and you belong to me. Whereas the two, as a feminine expression of some of the same things, is going to secure dependence from the other in indirect ways, like the Italian grandmother who's cooking the dinner, right? That's the way that the 2 secures loyalty. All of this implies that the path involves understanding and accepting that limits aren't set to restrict me or limit my freedom, but on the contrary, to enable us to be free. Normally, we tend to see limits as the end point of something, but they could rather be seen as a foundation from which to start something new. Accepting limits means containing the anguish and not running from it. It means letting go of the coasting downhill without brakes mindset, screaming silently, "My God, someone or something stop me." Accepting limits is about leaving behind rebellion, rebellion against the external world and the need to dominate reality. It means finding rest. It's even more important to leave behind rebellion against oneself, that is tangible present-day health. We must accept that things are as they are, that we are who we are with our own physical, emotional, and intellectual limits. Something as simple as realizing that being tired isn't the same as being sick, and being sick isn't a trivial inconvenience. It's about accepting oneself and realizing that we can change from within. I need to change from within, and I can influence my path more effectively by moving with rather than against the current. And another way that eights, I think, come to inner work is through burnout, sickness, exhaustion. They just deny their vulnerabilities in that way, in a very physical way. Letting go of inner rebellion against oneself is to reach the peace this type needs, the peace they yearn for, the love they don't know. It offers the possibility of self-care, self-love, and being loved. In my experience, this means being able to love and be worthy of love, and also releasing the need to demonstrate power, surrendering power, just like that. Allowing that others may have reasons and feelings that I perhaps have yet to recognize in myself, and which might help me develop and grow. It helps, therefore, to allow that the other may be right, instead of approaching them with a preconceived attitude of rejection. It helps to stop presuming others' malice. This opens the door to establishing real emotional contact and enables us to be genuinely generous, tender, and kind. I believe that surrendering power is where a new stage in the path begins with more truth. And then the journey becomes faster. One perceives deeper and more lasting changes. And though it's also more painful, it's much more loving, especially toward oneself. So surrendering power to reclaim innocence is the path of the eight. And the eight is funny because the eight really is powerful. So this surrendering of power, of course, they might have, a long convalescence from illness. They might burn out. Of course, there will be weakness, but in a way, the eight's redemptive arc is sort of like one of the most their strength is their strength. They just surrender their power to a higher power or to the underdog more explicitly. They reconnect their relationship with their younger part. But the mama grizzly bear, they are mama grizzly bears. They are lions. They become hooked up to a sense of morality, essentially, a value system, whether that's spiritual or something else. So surrendering their power doesn't mean like handing in their badge and gun. They maybe hand in their badge and gun and then they're given back their badge and gun with now a new sense of place. One begins to perceive that people are good and worthy, and from there one accepts whatever comes. In essence, it's about developing an attitude of trust and surrender to life as it is presented. And Claudio says, what's great about Juanjo is that he's believable. His words sound like he went through it. Juanjo says, yes, through blood and fire. So that's the end of the 8, self-preservation 8, and we'll pick up with the 9 next time.